Is it wise for Europe to be rearming itself? Here at the European Council Summit, there's a discussion about the details of what it is. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the different deals because that can change tons, but I want to talk to the press pack here about whether it's wise, whether this is the right thing for Europe to be doing. So I'm joined by Jakob Hanke, who is the Brussels bureau chief for the Handelsblatt, the German newspaper. Let me just ask you the question. Is it wise for Europe to be rearming itself, sort of philosophically and historically?
That's a deep, tough question. I think in terms of realpolitik, it is wise because right now Europe cannot defend itself. It is totally dependent on the United States. And the United States have made it clear that they no longer want to do that. They no longer want to spend that much money on defending Europe. Europe should start defending itself. Different presidents have done it in different ways. Trump is clearly doing it in a much more abrasive way, but the message is the same. And I think Europeans have to react if they want to be independent and if they want to be safe from Russia or any other threats.
What's the discussion about this in Germany? Is there like a concern, German history, rearming? West Germany didn't really rearm, didn't really decrease its military, but the German army is in a bit of a mess, right?
It is, and yes, in a way, it's a probably very pacifist society that has had the luxury of not really having to think about defense because other countries were defending us. So there's this, it's actually kind of a new thing to be talking about rearming, to be talking about missile systems, about tanks, that's something that a lot of Germans hadn't talked about in generations. But on the other hand, Germany did rearm quite strongly during the Cold War. So they had a defense expenditure north of 3% during the Cold War. And then cut that to less than 2% after the Cold War was over. So, in a way, they don't have to go back to World War II levels. It's enough if they go back to Cold War levels of rearming.
Do you think that there's a danger that governments rearming themselves can sort of, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail? If you've got a load of missiles in your armory, you kind of want to shoot them somewhere, and it will make European governments perhaps more aggressive. I don't know.
It's a good question. I mean, maybe. I think the way leaders are explaining it here is they're saying this is an arms race. Russia is rearming at a crazy pace. They're spending 10% of the GDP or more on defense. And right now, Russia is spending more on defense than all of the EU countries combined. And they're saying that shouldn't be the case. The EU is so much richer than Russia. Just the Benelux, Belgium, Netherlands, and the Luxembourg have a bigger GDP than Russia. Italy has a bigger GDP than Russia. So all of the EU combined should be able to outmatch what Russia is spending. And then what they're saying is, if we do that, then we can prevent a war just by showing Russia that we're strong and that it's not a good idea to attack any EU country, even Baltics, because I think that's the biggest fear, that Russia could kind of test NATO by attacking a small member and then seeing whether Trump is really willing to defend them. To your question, does that mean that if they rearm, they will be more aggressive in other places? Maybe, but it's a good question. Yeah.
Just one final one. You obviously work for an economic paper as well, right? That's what you're generally looking into. How much of all of this rearmament is to boost Europe's economies, and how much of it is to defend against Russia? Because we lag behind in AI, we lag behind in tech, and all of the things that America does well. But we're pretty good, and we've stayed pretty competitive in making arms. So creating a lot of arms is good economically, no?
It is good economically. You can see it in the share prices that are going up. It's also in a way bad economically, because it's money that you're spending that is not it's not productive. It's things that you literally shoot, explode, burn. It's not highways, schools, hospitals. Well, it's
By
kind of
its
sad to be
nature
spending.
destructive. Like that's
Exactly.
the point.
It's money that you basically burn up. So to increase your debt, to spend money on that, economically is not wise. But on the other hand, it is very wise if the alternative is that you get invaded. So I don't think they're doing it to boost the economies, because then they would have done it earlier when the economy was doing badly 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and they Germany especially was still holding onto its sacrosanct debt break. We cannot increase our debt just to boost our economy. That was the German rationale, right? But now they're saying actually we can and we have to do it if our security is at stake. So I think it's more that they really feel threatened, and that's why they're willing to throw away the budgetary restrictions, increase their debt. But yeah, the side effect is that that is good for some companies and for some share prices.
Okay, so now I'm joined by James Crisp, who is the Europe editor for the Telegraph. James, is it a risk for Europe to rearm?
Well, I don't think it's a risk. I mean, it's more risky not to rearm. I mean, we've had decades and decades of underinvestment in defence, and that sort of got us in the situation we're in now. I mean, I think rather than it being a risk to rearm, I think the question has to be, why hasn't Europe done it already? I mean, we've known this was coming since Trump's first term. Emmanuel Macron, has been banging on about this since 2017. But it seems that we've had to wait until crisis time before any serious action is begun to be taken. I mean, I think we're still a way off actually concrete steps being taken beyond just words at the moment, aren't we?
Well, this plan by von der Leyen is sort of to get lots of armaments, dual-use stuff, so that we can give it to Ukraine and stuff. The question I think people will ask themselves is, leaders who have more military capability tend to be a bit more military inclined. Do you think there's a concern that if Europe does start investing heavily in arms, in their armies, that potentially other wars might break out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's daft, if I'm honest. The fact is we've got a guy like Putin who's invaded Ukraine, who has invaded other countries as well. I mean, remember what happened to Georgia. Remember what happened to Chechnya. I mean, I think the thing is that, the idea of simply investing in defense being a provocation is mental. If anything, it's a deterrent, and it's a deterrent which is clearly needed when you're dealing with an unreliable person in Putin and a president who's clearly got no time for Europe.
There's a slight issue with the connection there, but tell me about the British perspective on this. I went to loads of briefings ahead of this summit, and they were saying that the UK could be involved in this. Do you think there's much appetite in Starmer's Downing Street, for them to get involved in some of these procurement, rearmament projects, or do you think that's so far down the line, so far out of what would be acceptable, and that Britain already kind of spends pretty good money on its military?
Well, I mean, look, so Britain has announced it will increase its defence spending to 2.5% by 2027, and wants to get to 3% in the next Parliament. I mean, that's not an easy sort of target for the UK to hit. Like a lot of other sort of European countries, money's tight. I think that, Starmer has calculated that Europe is necessary for economic growth. He seems to believe now that certainly this was how he angled the announcement, that you can use defence spending to create jobs, to have a sort of a positive effect on the economy. But, it's not just a cost, it can generate stuff as well. So, look, we've seen it in his attempt to reset relationships with the EU, that he sees Europe as key for economic growth. And I think it's clear that he also sees defence spending as key for economic growth. So where are you going to get the money? Well, one of the ways that you can do that is by sort of pooling resources and working together with European allies. At the moment, the sort of dependence on American security and American expertise in NATO is huge. And I think there's a sort of a need to sort of try and become able to be a bit more independent and sort of stand on our own 2 feet in Europe. I say that in Europe in the sort of the broadest sort of sense of the world, EU and non-EU, Turkey as well. And look, I didn't think that there'd be a situation where I'd be covering basically a European summit in London after Brexit. But that's what happened on Sunday. There is this crisis is sort of bringing around a big sort of change in thinking. One of the British issues with common defence in the past has been that it would be a rival to NATO, and I think that now that sort of boil's been lanced a bit by Brexit, but also, there's a feeling that the EU can raise money which would complement NATO.
Is European Union, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen trying to sort of position herself as Europe's commander-in-chief?
I mean, I think that she's actually quite wisely taken a bit of a backseat in the immediate to and fro between the White House and Europe over, Trump's frankly disgusting treatment of Zelensky recently. I think there's reasons for that, quite clever reasons. I mean, let's be honest, von der Leyen is a intelligent woman who comes from Angela Merkel's party, and those are 3 things that Donald Trump doesn't like. She was also quite close to Joe Biden. Donald Trump doesn't like that. So commander-in-chief, I mean, I think that's probably stretching it too far, right? I think she's identified the things that the EU can do, the things that it is sort of, good at on paper. It's good at finding money, as we saw with the coronavirus recovery fund. I mean, whether that ever gets paid back and how it will get paid back, that's a problem for, our grandchildren, I suppose. But,
Well, not your grandchildren in the UK.
No, well, that's true. That's true. Not my grandchildren, no. But everyone else is watching. Bad luck to your grandchildren.
Throw it down the ages.
Plenty of other. Britain's also got its own debts. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think what she can do, I think, is act as a kind of facilitator. I mean, I think her being a leader, as I think she was in terms of Ukraine and support for Ukraine. She's been quite an effective cheerleader, figurehead for the EU's support for Ukraine. I think that's been valuable, certainly in Ukraine, for morale and stuff like that, as well as the money and everything else. But, we're talking about defense, right? And military and sensitive stuff. And I think we've seen capitals reassert themselves on these issues. I mean, you're talking about defense and security. I spoke to one diplomat who said, look, if we're going to talk about European security and defense, we need to talk about the 2 nuclear powers, Britain and France. We need to talk about the major military powers. And of course, I think the most interesting thing is, what Friedrich Merz is going to change in Germany. And, I think if you had Britain, Germany and France working together on defence, other countries part of that coalition, maybe we'd shame certain other countries who are quite large and should be doing more, like Italy, Spain, to actually sort of pull their finger out and start getting even a little bit closer to 2% of GDP. Because frankly, they are letting the side down quite badly at the moment.
Talk to me about this just really quickly. Germany spending 500 billion euros on defence. 10 years ago, a newspaper like the Telegraph would have been really worried if Germany started really stepping up its military capabilities. And that's why the German army's sort of fallen into a bit of, trouble. It's basically sort of naff now. But do you think that everybody's okay with Germany rearming?
Oh, I think more than okay, more than okay. And I mean, look, the fact is that during the Cold War, West Germany, didn't demilitarize during the Cold War. I mean, it was certainly more active in the intelligence field. Okay, with US and sort of Western support. And yeah, it's no question that the decline of the Bundeswehr and the neglect of the Bundeswehr is something which happened at the end of the Cold War. So that's to blame. And this is Europe's richest economy. It's arguably the EU's most influential member state. It needs to be pulling its weight. Now, I know that the Germans, when I was in Brussels, and I know you'll have heard this hundreds of times as well, Jack, oh, when will the Germans show leadership in Brussels? They've always kind of been reluctant for historical reasons to do that. Well, now's the time. And, whether Merz can actually deliver on this rhetoric that he's been talking about, or if it'll be kind of dampened down in coalition negotiations with the SPD, sort of remains to be seen. But so far, I think he's saying all the right things. They're changing the debt break, which is huge for Germany. Their historical experience with hyperinflation. I don't think you can overestimate the impact that's had on the national psyche, and what a change this is. I mean, the idea of reintroducing conscription is also, this is quite big stuff. And I mean, certainly the idea of sending troops to Ukraine. I mean, we all know the last time that happened was in World War II. So this really does ask some major questions of Germans, basically, of German people and the way they view themselves as a country.
Okay, so you got some views there from two different journalists from two different countries. Sorry about some of the technical issues. I'm self-shooting this myself again for the first time and doing this out in the wild. And I'll keep doing this. I'll keep speaking to people in different press packs around the world that I travel to. Take it steady.